Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and this our continuing series this week on Armed Forces Week, for Armed Forces Week. Now yesterday Paul spoke about the RAF flying helmet. I want to do the RAF today, but I want to talk about the hardware that pilots flew basically. So I'm going to talk today about the Typhoon, not our modern jet Typhoon or the Eurofighter. I want to talk about the Hawker Typhoon, Second World War plane, best known as our premier fighter bomber, but it wasn't designed as a fighter bomber. The 1940 prototype was designed to replace the Hawker Hurricane of Battle of Britain fame, the big bomber buster. And it was to fulfill an RAF specification for a mid to high altitude fighter capable of over 400 miles an hour at 20,000 feet. All good, great. First prototype flew, but struggled. It doesn't have a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine in this plane. It has a Napier Sabre, massive air intake at the front. And that struggles at high altitude. The early ones did. It struggled at high altitude, could only get to about 410 miles an hour, not enough for what the RAF wanted. Also, if you look at this, it's a little bit like the Hurricane. It has very thick wings. Not like the Spitfire, it's got the really thin wings. And that caused drag. Again, it was a problem with its performance. It also had quite a serious technical fault. The tail was apt to drop off at high loadings, really serious. And to get around this problem in the 1940s, in 1940, if you see on the plane here, where I'm marked with paint with the red paint, there's sort of like red lines on there, that was some strengthening plates fitted to the back of the plane, basically stop that tail falling off. Never really worked, but it did reduce the amount of fatalities and problems with the plane. So, not very good as a fighter. Not good at all. It did have advantages, which I'll come to in a minute. Now, this model, which is an averagely built model, Airfix model, is of the Typhoon at its peak of development, basically. This is 1945 vintage. This plane. The earlier Typhoon looked a bit different to this. It didn't have the two cannon on. It was armed, the first prototype was armed with machine guns, just like the Spitfire. 8 machine guns, just like the Spitfire and the Hurricane. Also didn't have this bubble top canopy. It had a sort of hard top canopy with a car door on it to get in and out. Not the best for a pilot to get out of. This sort of bubble top came a little bit later on in its development. Anyway, so that first prototype was not the plane that they wanted, basically. It didn't perform well. Its development was retarded a bit in the 1940 to early 1941, as the RAF, seeing that wasn't doing its job, concentrated on development of the Spitfire and the Hurricane. But something happened in 1941 that really brought this plane to the fore. The Germans introduced the Focke-Wulf 190, a much more superior plane to anything the Allies had, and they were indulging in low-level tip and run raids on the British Isles. Nothing, the British had at the time, could catch it. The Spitfire couldn't catch a Focke-Wulf 190. But Typhoon could. At low level, Typhoon's Napier Sabre was perfect. This plane performed really well at low level. Rugged, take a lot of fuel in these wings. The second prototype introduced the cannon, so it was well armed. The Battle of Britain had shown that 303 machine guns aren't good against bombers or fighters, so we are introducing 20mm Hispano cannon, and the second prototype had that, and it performed really well. It was the only thing that could touch the Focke-Wulf 190. So when it was introduced, that's basically the role it took on. In 1942, they added bombs to it, called the Typhoon. It could, these massive wings, these strong wings, could carry 1,000-pound bombs, 2 500-pound bombs under these wings. That's as good a capacity as the early bombers that the RAF had were using in 1940 could take, a Hampton, something like that. So one little fighter could carry the same amount as a bomber, basically. That worked well. September 1943 comes along, and you can see on this model they introduced rockets to this plane. 60-pound rockets, 4 on each wing. They did trial later on putting 12 on every now and again, but standard armament was 8 60-pound rockets. So 1942, 1943, it's going through its development. Now come 1944, that is when the Typhoon reaches the height of its fame, you might say. It's when it becomes a legend. 1944, of course, D-Day. 6th of June, D-Day. Now, there are 18 squadrons available to 2nd Tactical Air Force that were supporting the ground forces. Now, if you want to know anything about 2nd TAF, Tactical Air Force, these books fantastic. There's 3 volumes of this. I've only got volume 2, but it covers July 1944 to January 1945. Fantastic books, these. They are basically almost like a diary. They are. They go through day by day from all through July to January 1945, telling you what happened on each particular day of the year, what operations took place, and what casualties were for 2nd Tactical Air Force. Also has some great illustrations as well. I'd recommend getting those books. They are fantastic. If you want to know in depth what happened with 2nd Tactical Air Force during Normandy and beyond, even before, the first volume covers up to D-Day. They're fantastic. I'd recommend those. So June 1944 comes along. Allies invade Normandy and they need close air support. Typhoon's a perfect plane for this. Get down low, support the troops. Now initially, after D-Day, all the planes, every plane that was fighting in Normandy, all RAF planes and the American Air Force, were flying from Britain over the Channel to Normandy to support the troops. Not the best thing in the world, because when you've got limited linger time over the target, and also if you've got a crippled plane that's trying to get back, there's a risk it's going to ditch in the sea on the way back. So priority when we invaded the continent was to get airfields in France. Few different types. I was lucky when I holidayed in Normandy. I stayed at a chateau, and in the fields at the side of it is the site of one of these airfields, an ALG, an advanced landing ground. Temporary, or meant to be temporary. Nothing there now, it's just back to fields again. But basically when we invaded the continent and the troops were moved inland a little bit, not too far because we couldn't get that far, RAF servicing commandos were sent over to build a whole series, British and American, of these advanced landing grounds, emergency refuelling strips on the continent. They get a bit cramped in the bridgehead because we haven't taken Caen, we haven't gone that far south. So you get a lot of airfields being built, which are rather in a cramped area. Anyway, basically an RAF service commando would go into an area, flatten down a load of crops, and build an airfield, basically. Might be tented accommodation. The flying strip was basically a rolled out mat of steel mesh. And like I say, I stayed at this chateau at Montragny right next to where one was built. And I've got a map here, which I'll just hold up against that. I don't know if you can see that or not. But basically, I stayed at this chateau here. This road is Caen that way, Bayeux this way. And it's just built in the field to the side. It's about 2 kilometres across and 2 kilometres north to south. So it takes a bit of space up, but it's an airfield, but a temporary one. Grass strips, not tarmac, all temporary. Nothing there now, of course. But yeah, that's an example of one. There were lots built in Normandy and further on as we moved out. But yeah, that's the airstrip I stayed, next one I stayed at. Anyway, that was built, started in late June. And when it was finished, the first planes that used it were RAF operated versions of the P-51 Mustang of 122 wing. They operated from that airstrip B7 for some time, and then on the 19th of July, Typhoons arrived. 123 wing, an extended 123 wing of planes, 4 squadrons of rocket firing Typhoons arrived at B7 to operate in the bridgehead. Now, Typhoons could take either bombs, like I said, they could take either bombs or rockets. They were interchangeable, but most squadrons specialised in one or the other. At B7, they were rocket firing Typhoons. Just the other side of Montrani, there was a Typhoon airfield, and they were bombfoons. They only operated with bombs. So that meant you could concentrate on your own tactics, because they were difficult to handle, these rocket Typhoons. Anyway, so operating in Normandy, they operated what was called a cab rank system. Basically, you send 4 Typhoons up into the air and they circle the battlefront. Out on the ground, embedded with the infantry, were observers, RAF observers. They were basically, if the infantry came up against opposition, they would radio the planes up in the air that are circling round and call them in, and they'd go down in sections of 2, unload their rockets, or their bombs if they were bombfoons, unload their rockets on the target, off again, recircle round and wait for the next call. They could be really exciting, exhilarating, dangerous missions, or it could be boring. Nothing might happen at all. Now, once these planes got to Normandy, another deficiency of the plane, you might say, turned up. Normandy soil is really fine, and it produces really fine dust. And you can see this Typhoon's got a very big air intake at the front. Now, when they were taking off, and they took off in, like say, sections of 4, with the amount of dust that was thrown up, the first 2 could take off, second 2 had to wait till the dust cleared. Now that caused a problem with the Typhoon. That dust is really abrasive. If you sit with your plane on the ground waiting to take off, it's sucking all the dust into that air intake. So there were 2 ways over this. The RAF got over this 2 ways. First of all, the first 2 would take off, masses of dust. The second 2 would fly into the dust, and when they took off, they'd bank off to the left or the right to get out that dust cloud. They also fitted, and they're not on this, but you can imagine on the front of that air intake, they fitted some big doors, which basically only opened when the plane was off in the air and up to speed. That kept the dust out, kept the engine from overheating, and made the plane a lot more efficient. Not an easy thing to operate in Normandy. Dust cloud, basically. Its greatest claim to fame, you might say, for this plane was when the Germans were retreating out of Normandy in August through the Falaise Gap, where you got long roads full of German tanks, trucks, infantry, all trying to escape from the Allies and get out into France and across the Seine. This plane base had a lot of sitting targets, dived down with these rockets. They're not the most accurate things in the world, but they are 60-pound rocket heads. It's been sort of said that a Typhoon firing its rockets is like the broadside of a battleship. You didn't need to hit a tank, and they often didn't hit tanks. It was found out afterwards that not many tanks have been knocked out by direct hits from rockets, but if you hit the side close to a tank, you're going to get the Germans out of it, you're going to knock the tank over. So although it's not an accurate weapon, the power of that and the size of that warhead is enough to disable a tank, knock out a truck, even if it's not a direct hit. So yeah, so that's the height of its fame. Of course, it went on into carry on with service with the RAF right up to the end of the war. And like I say, this is a definitive Typhoon 1B from 1945. Changed a little bit over time. This has got a 4-bladed propeller on. The initial planes had 3 blades. Also, I think this one shows it's got the successor to this was a Tempest, which has a much thinner wing, and this has got a Tempest tail on it. So yeah, it's a very interesting plane. Not designed as a fighter, but found fame as a fighter bomber. More look by judgment, I suppose. So yeah, I hope you found that interesting. I could go on about this forever, to be honest, but it's a very interesting plane. Not a very good model. I'm not very good at my models for years, but I hope you found that interesting. If you have, like and subscribe to the channel, and Paul will be back tomorrow with the next in the line of our Armed Forces Week videos. Okay, and I'll see you soon. Bye.